Medieval gangs weren't a myth. They were real and way more terrifying than you've been told. Some ruled cities, some walked free, but if they were so dangerous, why doesn't anyone talk about them? And what exactly were they doing that made even kings nervous? To find out, you'd only need to take a stroll through 1400s London, though you'd better keep one hand on your purse. Walking through London in the 1400s meant dodging more than just horse-drawn carts. The city streets crawled with organized gangs who had turned crime into an art form. The company of the night ruled the darkness, and their choice of name should tell you everything about when they preferred to work. They treated the city like their personal playground, except the swings were swords and the slides were alleyways perfect for ambushes. Gang members strutted around with daggers hanging from their belts as if carrying deadly weapons was perfectly normal behavior. Laws existed against bearing arms in certain areas, but enforcement was about as effective as a chocolate teapot. What made these street gangs particularly fascinating was their membership roster. Poor, desperate peasants didn't fill their ranks. Instead, wealthy merchant families provided most of the recruits. Rich kids with too much time and too little supervision decided that street fighting was the perfect hobby. Apparently, when you have everything you need, the next logical step is terrorizing people who have nothing. Markets transformed into battlegrounds where gang members would start fights over imaginary insults. Even areas near churches became dangerous, proving that religious buildings provided no protection against young men with anger issues and sharp objects. When arrests did happen, wealthy families had solutions ready. Bribery worked wonders on corrupt officials. Family connections could make court cases disappear entirely. Getting out of a medieval jail was easier than getting a good table at a popular tavern. You just needed the right connections and enough coin. London authorities attempted weapon bans in specific neighborhoods, but these laws had all the stopping power of a stern letter. Some groups operated for years without facing serious consequences, treating the city like their personal territory. These urban criminals were just the beginning of a much larger problem spreading across the countryside. Medieval England's highways were about as safe as swimming with sharks while wearing a suit made of fish. Highway gangs had transformed every major road into a potential crime scene, turning travel into a game of chance where the stakes were your life and everything you owned. These criminals weren't desperate outlaws living in caves. They were organized professionals who approached robbery with the same planning that merchants used for legitimate business. The only difference was that their customer service involved considerably more threatening and significantly less smiling. Strategic positioning was everything in the highway robbery business. Gangs set up operations along trade routes, near dense forests, and around border regions where escape routes were plentiful. Disguises became standard equipment for the clever groups. Some dressed as monks, counting on travelers to trust religious figures. Others wore fake royal guard uniforms. Nothing ruins your day quite like discovering that the helpful monk offering directions is actually planning to take everything you own. These gangs came heavily armed with horses, longbows, axes, and spears. The famous forests of Sherwood and Barnesdale became notorious criminal hideouts. In 1317 alone, authorities arrested over 300 people for gang activity along English trade routes. That number represented only the criminals unlucky enough to get caught. Merchants adapted by forming protective convoys and hiring armed escorts. Some groups established fake checkpoints where they collected illegal tolls from passing travelers. They offered protection from robbers while being the actual robbers, a business model that would make modern insurance companies weep with envy. Even more dangerous criminals were already forming, these ones with professional military training. When medieval wars ended, thousands of professional soldiers suddenly found themselves unemployed with very particular skill sets. Farming seemed boring compared to combat, so many former warriors decided to stay in the violence business as freelance criminals. Free companies sounded more respectable than criminal gangs, but the difference was mostly marketing. The White Company became one of the most notorious groups, operating across England, France, and Italy, like a traveling circus of armored destruction. Professional soldiers turned to crime brought a certain quality to their robberies that amateur thieves simply couldn't match. They possessed military-grade weapons, including swords, armor, siege equipment, and cavalry units that could overwhelm most town defenses. Manor houses and wealthy nobles became preferred targets because they offered valuable loot and defensible positions for extended sieges. These gangs would surround a property, capture the owners, and demand enormous ransoms. Rich people discovered that having money made them popular in all the wrong ways. The business model was brilliant in its twisted logic. Cities would hire these mercenary gangs to attack their enemies, paying substantial fees. Once the job was finished, many free companies would immediately rob their former employers. They got paid twice for the same trip. Former knights and military commanders led these organizations, bringing battlefield tactics to criminal enterprises. They established proper command structures and operated like legitimate armies with robbery-focused mission statements. These armored criminals proved that chainmail and moral flexibility made a devastating combination. They could take on legitimate military forces and win, making them virtually unstoppable, except by other professional armies. Some criminals took their education very seriously, though they used it in unexpected ways. Universities were supposed to create learned scholars. Instead, institutions like Oxford and Paris became training grounds for some of the most educated criminals in medieval Europe. Apparently, learning Latin and philosophy also came with advanced courses in intimidation and street fighting. Town versus gown conflicts weren't polite academic disagreements. They were violent confrontations that left actual bodies in actual streets. Students formed organized groups that terrorized local communities with the same enthusiasm they brought to their studies. Student protection rackets operated with remarkable efficiency. Groups would enter taverns and shops, consume whatever they wanted, then refuse payment while threatening violence. They turned dining and dashing into a scholarly pursuit, complete with Latin phrases and academic justification for theft. One particularly bold group kidnapped a tavern owner who dared criticize their wine selection, holding him until he apologized and promised better drinks. Most merchants learned to accept whatever students chose to pay, which was usually nothing. These academic criminals carried daggers and clubs while conducting illegal activities, sometimes fighting while still wearing their scholarly robes. The sight of someone getting stabbed by a person dressed for graduation probably confused witnesses about whether they were witnessing a crime or a very aggressive diploma ceremony. Academic status provided protection that ordinary criminals could never access. Local authorities couldn't arrest many gang members due to university privileges. Student criminals enjoyed diplomatic immunity for domestic terrorism, which was either a brilliant loophole or a catastrophic oversight in medieval law. Even religious students participated in these violent groups, proving that spiritual education didn't prevent skull-cracking when honor was at stake. The real problem was that local authorities often had no legal power to control these educated criminals. Medieval corruption wasn't subtle. It was an open marketplace where justice was bought and sold like any other commodity. Local officials didn't just ignore criminal activity, they actively participated in protecting gang members through bribery and family connections. The most dangerous criminals often wore government robes instead of street clothes, making corruption fashionable and extremely profitable. Wealthy families used their social influence to shield relatives who were terrorizing neighborhoods. Court records from cities like York reveal the same names appearing repeatedly for violent crimes without ever facing meaningful punishment. Officials would mysteriously drop charges or conveniently lose evidence whenever certain families made requests. Justice was supposed to be blind, but apparently it was also deaf, dumb, and easily bribed. Some gangs became so bold that they established their own taxation systems, demanding protection fees from local vendors. Bribery evolved into standard legal procedure. Gang members would arrive at court hearings carrying bags of coins, knowing that financial arguments were more persuasive than legal evidence. Festival security became a particularly creative criminal enterprise. Gangs would volunteer to provide protection during public events, then use their official status to shake down vendors. They got paid by the city to commit crimes against citizens. These groups created independent territories within larger cities, proving that urban planning could be accomplished through violence and intimidation just as effectively as through proper government. Regular citizens couldn't rely on official protection and had to find alternative solutions to gang violence. When official law enforcement failed completely, ordinary people decided to handle crime prevention themselves. Farmers, shopkeepers, and craftsmen formed unofficial patrols to protect their communities from gang violence. Fighting professional criminals with farm tools and hunting equipment was like bringing a pitchfork to a sword fight, except sometimes the pitchfork won through sheer determination. Villages developed ingenious defense strategies, including digging traps in roads to stop horse-riding robbers. Captured gang members found themselves imprisoned in barns and cellars. Vigilante groups created their own legal systems since official courts were corrupt or ineffective. Local justice became a community activity where everyone got to participate in deciding whether criminals deserved punishment or just really stern lectures. Punishments reflected community creativity. Public whipping sent clear messages. Head shaving marked criminals for easy identification. Banishment removed problems permanently without requiring imprisonment costs. Peace guilds formed in towns where individual action wasn't sufficient to handle organized criminal gangs. These coalitions created mini armies of angry shopkeepers and determined farmers. The main problem with taking justice into your own hands is that power corrupts everyone, not just the people you're fighting against. Some vigilante groups eventually became as brutal as the gangs they originally opposed. Once people got comfortable with violence, distinguishing between justice and revenge became difficult. Community self-defense worked until the defenders decided they enjoyed the work too much to stop when the original threat disappeared. These land-based criminal enterprises eventually expanded to include water-based opportunities. Medieval piracy represented organized crime taken to its maritime conclusion. Port cities became headquarters for criminal networks that treated the ocean like their personal highway system, complete with toll booths operated at sword point. The Vitalian brothers dominated the English Channel and North Sea with professional efficiency. They probably didn't have parrots or treasure maps, but they definitely had the weapons and attitude to make merchant sailors wish they'd chosen different careers. What made pirate gangs particularly dangerous was their semi-legitimate status during wartime. Kings and nobles would secretly support pirate groups, using them as unofficial naval forces. Government-sponsored piracy was apparently an early form of outsourcing military operations to private contractors who happened to enjoy theft and violence. Entire coastal communities faced ransom demands from pirate gangs who threatened to burn ships and destroy homes. Towns were forced to choose between bankruptcy and complete destruction. Pirate vessels were designed for speed and surprise. Small, fast ships could outrun larger naval vessels while launching devastating attacks on slower merchant vessels. Pirates discovered that running away quickly was just as important as fighting effectively, especially when your business model depended on not getting caught. One gang gained notoriety for kidnapping a bishop and demanding barrels of wine as ransom instead of gold. Apparently, even professional criminals understood that quality alcohol was more valuable than money when it came to celebrating successful crimes. Coastal communities often found it cheaper to pay regular tribute to pirate gangs rather than constantly rebuilding after raids. Medieval piracy became so integrated into the wartime economy that many authorities stopped trying to eliminate it and instead focused on directing pirate attacks toward enemy nations. Medieval gangs demonstrated that organized crime has always been a persistent human problem regardless of historical period or available technology.